before I just jump into a lecture, I've been gone so long, do you guys have anything that you're like burning to know, like about one of the other lectures or something that, one of the guest lecturers said, or how, what questions you guys got for me? How are things going? What are you having trouble with in your writing? Just why don't you throw a few questions at me, and we'll do that for just a few minutes here.
Elantris was your first published book, but you had written 5 previously?
I had, exactly.
What was it that did not let those be sold? What did you learn?
That's an excellent question. Shows you're really paying attention. Nice work. For me, I really think it was a mixture of two things. First off, Elantris, when I sold that, I figured out revision. Early in my career, I was much more of a one-drafter. I still am a one-drafter. That's another term for an architect. I don't use it as often because it kind of misleads people, but I thought of myself as more like a one-drafter, which meant that once the book was done, I had real trouble doing revisions. I didn't want to revise. If I felt I'd learned stuff during the book, I felt like I wanted to just write a new book that incorporated all that rather than going back and doing revisions. I got bored of books too easily, in other words. And about the Elantris era is when I really started digging into revision and figuring out how to revise and how to take a good book and make it great. That's more of a problem for someone like myself that has that inclination, that when you finish something you want to set aside and go on to something else. A lot of my friends, like Dan, who I wish I could have had come talk to you, but he's living in Germany right now, is very much a gardener. He's very good at revision. It has been from the beginning. His problem is always getting a project off the ground or getting a good ending, that sort of stuff, like getting the pieces to come together. He's like, he can revise a chapter and make each chapter brilliant, but getting the whole thing to come together is much harder for him. And for me, the whole would always snap together and everything would come together, but it would all just be okay rather than being awesome. The other thing that made the difference was a lot of my early books were experimental. I did write a cyberpunk. I wrote a science fiction, just action adventure, space opera is what you'd call it. I wrote a comedy, and I wrote 2 epics. And it was settling on, I really do want to do epic. Elantris is the first where I'm like, all right, epic fantasy is what I do. And I wanted to make sure that's what I did. And I would kind of nudge you guys that direction just a little bit, meaning experiment early on in particular with some different styles and genres. Dan, to bring him up again, started in epic fantasy because he'd read a lot of epic fantasies. But his natural inclination is toward shorter, stranger books, horror or thrillers or kind of what we would just call regular fiction, but kind of new, weird and stuff like that. And that's what he was really good at writing and was really excited him in writing, even though he'd read a lot of epic fantasy. A lot of people come into a class like this thinking that they're epic fantasy writers just because, they happen to like my books or during the era earlier, when I was taking it because we liked Robert Jordan or something. And liking that doesn't necessarily mean that's your voice. Jancy, another one of my first student to get published, she came in and talked to you guys. She was writing an epic fantasy when she took the class from me. It turns out that her voice is YA, even mainstream or YA kind of fantastical. But she found that those were the stories that really worked for her. Despite, I don't know if she told you that, but she started writing epic fantasies because it's kind of like that's what you do, right? And so try some different things. Read more broadly now that you're experimenting with writing, and try some stories like the ones you read and see if you find a voice somewhere else unexpected.
Thank you.
For me, I found it was epic fantasy, and that might just be what happens with you, but yeah. All right, anything else? Yeah.
You mentioned that you had problems kind of keeping going, like you finish a book and then you wanted to try something else.
Yeah.
How do you not just kind of give up on a project when you get bored with it? How do you keep yourself?
Yeah, you just do it. The same way that when you don't want to paint the rest of the fence, or you've got one coat on it done and it looks okay, you just do it anyway. And I say that to you because if you're like me, revision is never what I want to be doing. Even still, I don't say, yippee, I get to revise now. That is the actual work part of my work. Doing the world building and things like that is just pure fun. I love doing it. I could do that all day. The writing gets to be work, but not as much as the revision. So if it's not a natural thing for you, I still think you probably need to learn how to do it. There are some authors out there who are anti-revision. They say, learn how to write the first time and then leave it alone. This is a school of thought. I don't subscribe to it. I've never met a writer personally who I thought could get it right on the first try, even the most brilliant ones. I'm sure there are people out there who can do it. But I find that at least a few solid drafts will always improve the writing. Don't go on eternally. It is good advice not to just, keep tweaking things. You gardeners, stop tweaking eventually. But a few solid revisions I found helped everything. So
We might be past it now, but Howard, when he was here, said a couple times that the way he thinks about going through stuff when he's kind of bored with it, he says just keep chopping wood and carrying water until the river and the forest are gone. So that's the way he.
Yep. It's got to happen, and you may have to figure out your own, whether it's a carrot or a stick. For me early on, it was the stick. It was, if I don't do this, I'm going to end up doing a job that I hate, because I will hate anything that is not writing, because I fall in love with writing so much. And so I'd better figure out a way to make a living off of it, and that means doing what I don't want it to do. For other people, it is the carrot. Hey, I get, I will buy a box of Linder truffles or whatever, and, every page I revise, I get a truffle, whatever it is. Pack of magic cards. I've done that before.
Yes.
Yeah. And whatever, figure out what works for you. Figure out your psychology, right? That's part of what this class is about. Figure out your psychology and learn how to exploit it. There's a question over here somewhere, I think, right? No? All right. Yeah.
Well, because last week it was, I don't remember his name, talking about short stories.
Yes, Eric.
I'm just curious, maybe, because you've written both short stories as well as the...
Yes, but my shorts are all novellas or novelettes, meaning I write short novels. I don't actually write short stories. I've written one decent short story.
Is that the one in Armored?
Armored is even, I think, a novelette. The decent short stories for a collection of Charlene Harris's that she's putting together called Games Dead People Play. And it's actually like 5,000 words. I'm so proud of myself. Armored might be a short story, but I think it strays into novelette. If it's novelette's over 7,500 words. Novella is 17,000. And when I'm writing those, I think like a novel, just shorter, rather than a short story, which Eric talked about, which is a very different skill.
Yeah, I'm just asking what method you use to transition from writing bigger novels like you normally do to shorter stories. So.
Fewer viewpoints, fewer locations are your big friends for writing something shorter, like a novel. If you want to write true short stories, go listen to Mary Robinette Cowell talk about the mice quotient. It's Orson Scott Card's mice quotient. Listen to his lectures or read about him, or listen to the Writing Excuses where she talks about it. She says some brilliant stuff about writing a short story. But basically, if you want to go short, you pick character, setting, or plot and do one idea for them. Like a novella, like I do, I will pick one character element, one setting element, and one plot element, and that becomes a novella. For a novel, I'm doing, usually a dozen of each. So, yeah. All right, so viewpoint intents. This is going to maybe be surprisingly important to some of you, meaning that it's something you may not have thought a lot about, but is one of the most important aspects of transitioning from amateur to pro. And learning how to control your viewpoint intents and make it work for you will elevate you very quickly above the rest of the writers. This is one of those things. I've talked about other ones before, but this is one of those things that the editors and the reader can tell in like the first 5 paragraphs, like the pianist and the metaphor I gave you, you could tell the difference between a pianist who practiced for 20 years and one who practiced for 2 years. You could tell in a matter of minutes. For writing, the stuff you see on the first page, the things that are going to jump out at an editor or reader are how well you manage your learning curve and your info dumps, which we talked about last time I was here, and how well you manage your viewpoint intents. Because those are the things you can really get in a few paragraphs that really jump out at you. Let's talk first about the viewpoints, and then we'll talk about the tenses and what they do for you and how you can use them as tools. There are 2 main tenses, or 2 main viewpoints types used in fiction today. Can anyone tell me what they are?
First and third person.
Which third?
Limited, I guess.
Third, limited, and first person are your defaults. And third. We'll talk about the weird ones as well. So you have them as arrows in your proverbial quiver. But those are arrows that should be rarely used, okay? We'll talk about how to do these well. First can actually be, there's several different breakdowns in first, and we'll talk about it. The most common is actually, I've had to define these myself just so I can understand them. These are not standard definitions. Someone else will have standard definitions. But is kind of like the movie camera. First. This is the first person that you get the impression that even though they're telling you the story, they're telling it to you as it happens, not after the fact. It's not a flashback. If you want an example of a story that does this well, go read Uglies by Scott Westerfeld. An excellent example of something that uses the first person, kind of the movie camera. I don't know how else to explain it, but it's not like, some first person, which is the reflection. First person. This is the first person, and if you watch my lecture last year, I probably have different definitions for these. I just have them grouped in my head, so don't treat these as like, but this is the one where you get a first person, something like, has anyone here read Assassin's Apprentice by Robin Hobb? Excellent book, brilliant use of first person. It's a reflective first person. Another one of these is Name of the Wind by Pat Rothfuss. These are the first person that you get the sense that the person is actually telling the story to you at some future point, and it's going into kind of this flashback first person.
Moon is a harsh mistress.
Yeah. These are the 2 main ones. There is kind of another one that I see used very rarely, and this is the storyteller. And this one blends into a third omniscient. This is the kind of where you have a storyteller who's telling you a story and they reference themselves as I. They may not even be a character in the story, but they're telling it to you. And so it's kind of a blending between this. This was actually fairly popular in the older days. You don't see it as much anymore. I can't even think of a really good example of this. Chronicles of Narnia. Okay, yeah. And The Hobbit kind of feels like this, though I don't know if he ever uses the first for it. I think The Hobbit is just true third omniscient.
Book Thief?
Yeah, okay, yeah. So yeah.
Every single Redwall novel?
I haven't read Redwall. I know, I feel like a doofus that I haven't read Redwall, but we will use that as an example then. But you've got this sort of thing. It's used much more rarely, but it is kind of this blending between the two, and it's actually one of the ways that third omniscient does work, that I've seen it work. So these are your different breakdowns there. We'll talk about what each of them do. I will mention that this is kind of, I've found it's hard because I don't read enough. I do read in the genre, but I don't read enough to tell. It feels like this has become the default in YA recently.
At least first person using the I.
Yeah, first person,
teenagers.
definitely. Either one of these 2, but it feels like this one's kind of taken over a bit. Like, you don't get the sense that this is happening, that someone's sitting after the adventure and telling it to you. You feel like you're getting almost a stream of consciousness formed into a first person as it's happening. All right. So keep that in mind if you're writing YA. That this is the kind of the default. It doesn't mean you have to do it, but it is something. It is something that's very popular in the genre right now. So third limited is your basic third-person viewpoint. Third, you could say, is split between limited and omniscient, but they're so different that you really want to kind of think of them as two different viewpoints. Third limited is where a given scene is from a single character's viewpoint, and in that scene, you describe everything through that character's lens, so to speak. Okay? And so if they can't see something, then you can't describe it through sight. For instance, if you're in my viewpoint and the door slams, you say you heard a door slam. You can say a door slammed, but you don't show the door slamming. You show him hearing it, or you talk about him hearing it. You don't want to, of course you want to use shows rather than tells, but you also don't want to imply things happening off stage that the character can't see. You also stay away from information the character doesn't know. And when you give a description, you try to give a description through the character's eyes and their lens so that you are giving characterization at the same time. This kind of blends into the lecture we had last time, where we talked about info dumps and how really awesome storytelling is going to do your info dump by way of the character. Well, this is an extrapolation on that, okay? So, the tenses are basically past and present, and freaky future. That's your freaky one that you're only allowed to use if you take an experimental writing class or if you want to get published in like some experimental magazine or something like that. I suppose there could be uses for it otherwise, but you really, stay away from this one. It's scary. Stay away particularly from second-person future tense. Because that's the freaky one down here, second person.
Is this the second person, like, giving instructions?
Yeah, it's Choose Your Own Adventure books are in second person. And there are some very experimental stories that can do cool things with second person. The thing about them is it kind of just gets old after like 2,000 words, unless it's like in a Choose Your Own Adventure or something, which is why you got to be really careful with both second person and future. Past and present, surprisingly, are surprisingly similar. If you're used to one, the other one will jar you for a little while, and then your mind will switch over, and by the time you're about a third of the way through the book, you won't be noticing anymore, is what we find. That said, there are some people who really feel that present is more immediate, and past is less immediate, so they love present. That said, past is the default for a lot of the mainstream adult science fiction and fantasy. YA is split between present and past right now. I would say that if you go into a bookstore and randomly pick up a popular YA book, there's a pretty good chance it's this first person in the present tense. But it switches between the two. You'll find everything in YA. So, do you guys know the difference between these two? Is there anyone who don't feel embarrassed, who is confused by the idea of past versus present tense? Okay? Yes. Okay. So, with past versus present tense, you want to probably default to past tense. He went to the store and picked up a bag of groceries, rather than saying he goes to the store and picks up a bag of groceries in your narrative. Stick to saying everything in the past tense and stay very far away from present tense, even if it gets kind of tricky if you're writing in the first person and it's still the case and you're writing like this one. This gets really problematic because, for instance, if I say, I was a detective on the streets of Chicago. My best friend was Willie. Willie is because he still is. Does that make sense? You've got this sort of weird transition thing where you can transition into present tense because Willie is still your best friend and he's still this. I would suggest staying away from that and just sticking completely to past tense. If this sort of thing is confusing for you, or if it's just go ahead. You will never go wrong writing everything in past tense. Even saying Willie was a, because it's all taking place in the past, and you don't have to worry about present. Okay.
Have you ever read a third-person present?
Third-person present, yeah, a lot.
Yeah.
First book of the Recluse series is third-person present. So if you go pick that up and you want to see, it's by Lee Modesett. L.E. Modesett Jr., I guess, is how I should say it, because we're on camera. I should say it properly. Lee's a good guy, and I think the first book is in present tense. You see it a lot more in the past, because once science fiction, and fantasy as genres are relatively new. The novel as a genre is relatively new. But you've got sci-fi books taking off in the golden age, really in the 30s and 40s and things like that, and then fantasy really is starting to establish itself in the 60s and 70s. That's like just a blink of time when it comes to storytelling and things like that. And so it took a while before we really settled on what it is we do, and this could all shift. Maybe across the next 20 years, everything will shift back to going to present tense. Who knows? But you'll find you'll find things different in older books. For instance, a lot of the older books are not as strict on viewpoint as newer ones are. For instance, if you go back and read the original Ender's Game, I think he's actually updated it and changed some of the tense things. But you would occasionally slip into Bean's tense just for no reason, and you'd have 2 paragraphs of Bean and things like that, because it wasn't as standardized back then. And nowadays, if you pick up one of Scott Card's books, every time there's a viewpoint shift, there's a line break, and you shift to someone else's scene. You give an indication. We are now swapping heads, and that's what we do right now. You give a line break, and in your manuscript, you just put a pound sign alone on its own line, center it. And that means line break, and then really your trick right here, so you've got your text. In this first sentence or two, you want to establish whose viewpoint we've moved to. And if it's a new character, the first character mentioned, people are going to default to assuming that's the viewpoint, unless you can jar us out of it very quickly. So that's how you do third person limited, is you do a line break or a chapter break to switch to a new character. Tad Williams is very good at this. If you go read some of his books, he's very good at viewpoint shifts. Robert Jordan did it quite extensively, and I think he was a master of the third person limited, despite starting each book with a paragraph of omniscience. So let's talk about. You now know what limited is. At least you've got a handle on it. Does everyone have a handle on what first and third limited are? Any questions about that? You know what they are. We'll talk about what they do in a few minutes. Omniscient is this weird beast where you are in everyone's head at the same time. This is easiest if you're doing the storyteller, right? An omniscient with the storyteller, without even sometimes the first person perspective. I mentioned The Hobbit. It's like this. It is hardest to do in the true omniscient style, which is basically every paragraph is a new viewpoint. And you're going to show everyone's thoughts in the same scene, and you're not going to withhold any of them. I feel that the master of this was Frank Herbert, and Dune is the great science fiction fantasy omniscient book. And if you want to learn how to write omniscient, you should probably look at Dune. One thing you'll notice that he does with omniscient is he doesn't withhold any information. If someone walks on stage with the other characters and they are secretly a traitor, they think, well, I'm so sad I have to betray these people. You see immediately what's going to happen. He does not hide secrets from you. He shows what everyone's thinking and feeling, to the point that David Lynch, when he made the movie, decided to give everybody voiceovers so you could get the omniscient viewpoint, and it was really creepy. But I'm very fond of that movie. You guys seen the old movie?
Yeah.
Sting's in the
Love
movie,
it.
and in what, like black leather or something like that?
And every
Spandex?
time before he comes on the screen, there's like a wailing
Yeah.
guitar.
It's got Patrick Stewart in it as Gurney. It's got Patrick Stewart with a mullet. I mean, come on. It's actually a very fine movie, but it does weird things like that. And one of them is they try to convey the omniscient viewpoint of the books by having people's thoughts as you zoom in on them. It is very hard to do. Very hard. I would recommend you not do it except as experimenting unless it's something you're passionate about. If it's something you're passionate about, go for it. But understand, this is really hard, and you may want to practice with this or this first. All right? Keep that in mind. But we will talk about how to do Omniscient as well. So, the bulk of our conversation is going to be about choosing between third limited and first person, and why you would make it a choice between one or the other. Anyone who's not taken the class before, so no cheating. Tell me, why would you want to pick one or the other? What do you think the difference is between these? What do they do? Yeah.
We talked in the past about having characters that don't start off being relatable. If you have that character in a first-person viewpoint, it will turn more people off because they have to put themselves in that person's head.
Yeah, that's true. You could, first person tends to be, let me just say this, you tend to want to keep to many fewer viewpoints. Okay, so let's put a bold up here. Fewer. Why would you want to keep to fewer viewpoints?
Because if you have people that are trying to put themselves in the character, it really breaks the magic if they have to keep switching between.
Okay, yeah, that's reasonable.
Really hard to distinguish between people.
Yeah, because they're all going to be saying I. And because of this, and a lot of times when you read first-person narratives, you don't know the main character's name, right? Like I couldn't tell you the main character's name from Uglies. If I thought about it, maybe. But it's because they're, you use a lot of I.
Starts with a T.
Yeah. That's just the thing. So fewer viewpoints is usually the suggestion on that. And because of that, this is a legitimate thing. If you're going to have a really nasty viewpoint, you could not maybe want to do first person because of that, the immediacy and the closeness.
When you have a first-person character, if you have a very, very interesting character, a first-person perspective might help you explore that character throughout the entire story.
Yeah. One interesting voice. Sorry, that says voice. So we're going to do this as first. This is the worst table ever. Okay, one interesting voice can just really be shown off in a first person. Because if you've got a character voice that's just engaging and fun and interesting, I bet the YA group can point out some examples of books that do this because it's something that YA tends to do really well. You just want to read about their voice. A single first-person narrative from them can be just charming. Yes?
You have to limit the amount of information that you're giving out because if you think about something like Fight Club, the reveal at the end of Fight Club would be surprising if you're going from third person. Because if you're trying to go from a viewpoint, there's less information that they know about the entire world.
So to dig into this, first person can be more unreliable. A third can still be unreliable, but it's trickier. A first, it's much easier to have an unreliable. This is a character who's withholding information from the reader. Because they're telling the story, they can choose not to say certain things, and they can tease you with certain things. I built a whole series doing this, the Alcatraz series, where I made fun of the fact that the character was unreliable. And that helps. That said, with third, you can dole out information in a much more interesting way. Or not more interesting, in a more, like you can jump to all the characters around a character knows the information, and you can give little secrets. So the perspective jumps. The perspective jumps can help you dance around that unreliability. You can withhold the information by who you show, whose eyes you show. So it can be an advantage depending on what type of story you want to do. Do know that you can do an unreliable third person, and you can do a third person who withholds information. It feels like cheating every time I do it, okay? Because if the character knows something, you really got to, here's a screenwriting term for you, you got to hang a lantern on it, right? If the character knows something that the reader isn't supposed to know yet, you've got to have a reason the character isn't thinking about that, and the more you do that, the more the more strained it's going to be on the reader. Like if you have the character think, nope, I can't think about that, too painful. The reader will generally go along with that a little bit. If they're doing it too much, they're just going to be like, oh, come on, get over it. But if it's first person and they're saying, I don't talk about this, this is private to me, that actually goes across a lot more easily to a reader, if that makes sense. But you can hide information in a third. A great example, if anyone's read the Wheel of Time books, Matt Cawthon is an unreliable third-person limited character, meaning that he thinks certain things that he's convinced of, but deep down he actually doesn't believe them. But he thinks them, and so it's like his surface thoughts and his deep thoughts are contrasting each other. And so in the third-person perspective, Robert Jordan will show his surface thoughts, and that will allow, and then his actions will show his deep thoughts, and you can get across the idea that he's a bit unreliable in some of the ways he sees the world. And that's less, in this one being directly unreliable, and more being a character who has an unreliable perspective on the world. They see the world in a way that you say, okay, this is how they see the world. They're not lying to me, but they're wrong, and they show that they're wrong by what they do.
So with the third person and the characters like not reflecting on something in their past or whatnot, what's a good way of making a reader accept that?
Like I said, number one, don't do it too much. Number two, find a mechanism. Like I said, that you hang a lantern on it where you specifically tell the reader, yes, I'm not telling you this, but I promise I'll tell it eventually. For instance, I used Kelsier was a bit unreliable in Mistborn, first Mistborn book. And this is expanded by making him a character that from the get-go you understand is a character who is flamboyant, who has a lot of impulsive behavior, and you can follow in his thoughts when he says, I'm not gonna worry about that. That's something for later on. Whereas another character, for instance, Sazed, would not do that, and you wouldn't buy it, because Sazed is reflective, and he ponders on things, and he digs deep into them. And so though one character, because of how I established the character, can be unreliable, where another one couldn't be unreliable. And then when Kelsier will think about, because I had to shadow the plot, his true plot, for what was happening at the end of the book, which I won't tell you. I don't want to give the spoiler for anyone who hasn't read it. But he has a deeper plot. But what I would do that. The mechanism is when he got close to it, he'd think, no, that's only the emergency contingency plan. I don't want to have to do that. Let's not dwell on it. Which again is what we call hanging a lantern on it, where that's basically me promising you as the reader, hey, yes, I'm withholding some information. You will find this out eventually. Yes, you're smart for noticing. Pay attention, and you'll be rewarded, which makes readers more likely to accept it. But again, if you do it too much, they're not going to like it, okay? And it's legitimate that they're not going to like it because it's kind of a dirty trick. All right?
Fair enough.
I would say personally the two biggest things to think about is the number of viewpoints you want to use between the two. Third person limited tends to be much stronger at a ton of different viewpoints. And first person tends to be stronger at a single or maybe two very dynamic viewpoints. The other thing is if you have one central character and your story's really about that person and who they are, first person can be pretty awesome. One thing that is a consideration is that first person by its nature, even if you're doing this one, which does minimize it, there's a sense of lack of urgency, a little bit, because the person is telling you the story, so you think they must be okay, right? Now this can be totally mitigated. The best first person stories will not make this a hindrance, they'll make it part of it. For instance, you know that Quoth lives in Name of the Wind because he starts telling his story and it's all a flashback. The urgency is not whether his Quoth is going to live, but it's like, oh no, he's setting himself up for a major failure. The whole series is basically about how this hero becomes a broken innkeeper who's a very different person, right? The same thing is basically what happens in Assassin's Apprentice, where you get to see him years later and you're like, oh, how did you end up in this place? Poor Fitz. And that allows you to build some urgency. That's only used by this one. In this one right here, there's just a slight twinge in the reader that, yeah, they're telling me a first-person story, so they're probably going to survive through it. So keep that in mind. That said, the twist that it's first person, but they're a ghost telling the story, that's been done a lot. That doesn't mean you can't do it. But every time I tell this, if I ask a question, someone usually says, well, if I had a ghost, I could trick them, and it's first person, they are dead. But yes, that has been done. I think The Lovely Bones is that, isn't it? It's like a first person story. What's that?
You know she's dead from the beginning.
Okay, it's not a twist. That's good, because the twist, their ghost is done a lot, or has been done a lot in the past. What's that?
I said nothing new under the sun.
Yeah, nothing new under the sun. That said, so vampires have been done a lot, and then Stephanie Meyer released a book. So don't, but just understand where you're coming from when you do some of these things. Third person, because it's inherently a little more reliable, does allow you to kind of set a narrative tone for the book. All right. So this lets you cheat on voice a little bit, meaning you can use your voice. And yes, you're going to try and show everything through a character's viewpoint, but it'll all be tied together because you've got basically, this third-person narrator who is telling you the story. It's just telling you through the eyes of the various characters. That's why something like The Wheel of Time has a set sort of narrative cohesion, despite having 120 different viewpoint characters. Because even though in each scene you will show that it's that character by how they respond to things and by the descriptions, there is a narrative voice for it all, particularly in the descriptions and things like this, which allows you can get away with, for instance, using words in the narrative that the character wouldn't necessarily use when describing things, right? This, however, lets you cheat on info dumps. The reason that you can cheat on info dumps, you want to guess why you can cheat on info dumps? You can put so many info dumps in a first person.
Because the person's telling the story.
Person's telling the story, and you can stick it in their viewpoint, and you can make it a riot to read. You can hide the info dumps so much more easily in this, because if you imagine your very dynamic character, and you want to give this info dump of, everybody has to go and learn the magic, and the character's like, I hate this stuff, okay? We've got to go, and we've got to go get painted up and throw mud at each other or whatever. Whatever. You can have the character go off on how much they hate the magic, things like that. I eventually want to tell a story about someone who has to go shovel dragon poo, and it's like, dragons are awful. I hate dragons. I got to shovel the dragon poo. You can do this cheating, which keeps your learning curve actually a little bit lower as you info dump. Which is another advantage to it in YA. It's more immediate, it's faster, and it allows you to cheat on this. This tends to be more grand. This tends to allow you to have kind of those slightly out of character moments where you describe the beautiful vistas as you pass them, even though the character may not be able to form words that would put that all together. You still try to keep it in viewpoint. Don't try and break viewpoint, but like I said, you can cheat on it a little bit. And so you can kind of see what these two things are doing. That said, you can steal one from another. For instance, I think that Pat Rothfuss, Name of the Wind, has some grandness to it. But if you read that book, it's really about one character, right? And who that character is. It's not even about the plot. And that's why the first-person narrative that works so well. If you read some of the great epics, the third person or third-person omniscient allows these kind of big, sweeping moments and these grand casts of characters, which allow you to do some different things in your storytelling. You can adapt either tool to what you want to use, but those are kind of what they naturally do. Questions, comments, thoughts? If you prefer one of the other, go for it. Honestly, just hone using that one.
Scott Card says to try to write horror
You don't know a lot of horror stories end up bad, so like how do you
End up what?
end up with an unhappy ending?
Yeah. Well, the thing about it is, horror is different from slasher. When we say horror, most people think slasher because of the slasher films of the 80s and 90s. What Scott is talking about there is actual horror. Actual horror, dying is the easy end for an actual horror. And if you go read the great classic horrors like Lovecraft, they're all in first person. And they're about someone discovering something awful, generally about themselves, that they don't want to discover. And you don't want them to have to discover. And having to listen to them discover it and talk about it is excruciating. Horror tends to be a very character-driven genre. The John Cleaver books by Dan are in first person. They have this one captivating, interesting viewpoint. And the horror of them is, that the boy in them is more of a monster than the monsters he hunts. That's the horror. The horror is not, is the monster going to kill me? And so that's why first person works so well for a good horror story, would be what I would say.
At a certain point, don't these end up blending? Because in third person, whenever you go into dialogue, whenever you have something from the viewpoint of the character, that kind of touches with, if not straight up goes into first person.
Yeah, it does. It does.
And vice versa. Like in The Name of the Wind, you have a third person narrative interjected with all of.
Now, don't use that as an example because Pat is using a frame story. He actually didn't start with the frame story in place. It's the last thing he added for that book. And he's doing something kind of, I wouldn't say gregarious, but definitely non-standard. If you haven't read the book, he starts in the third-person narrative and then jumps into the first person as soon as Quoth starts telling his story. And the bulk of the story is in the first person. So yes, you can blend them. And you can do cool things with blending them. But don't use that as the standard. Use that as somebody who's taking both tools and using them in interesting ways. Now, you do touch on first person whenever you go into dialogue in third person. Yes, you do. We're talking mostly about the narrative, separating out the dialogue. We'll talk about how to write good dialogue and things like that. But we're separating that out right now and just saying we're talking about the narrative and the viewpoint.
At LTUE, I had a conversation with, I forgot her name, somebody, the lady that wrote The Thief. Yeah. And we were talking about third person limited mostly.
Mm-hmm.
And we theorized a little bit about it being possible that you could write a third person limited book and have every single character that's in the book at all, on whatever side, be it from their, talk about their third person or kind of head hop without it being a third omniscient. And also we kind of talked about like an idea where you could have a third person limited, where it's not necessarily limited per character, but limited like one goal oriented.
Okay.
So you've got two characters that are both trying to achieve the same thing, and you can talk about kind of their thoughts and kind of do a little bit of head hopping. But yeah, underlying it all was being aware of what you're doing.
Being aware of what you're doing. See, like what you're doing there is, I say, you were taking, like in that second one, you're taking a bit of Omniscient, and you're using what Omniscient can do and bringing it to the table, and kind of combining it in, like Pat combined first and third. But yeah, be aware of what you're doing and be aware of what your tools accomplish, and why you want to use them in certain ways. And for the majority of you, my suggestion is that you pick one of these two for a given project. Don't, try them both, but pick one of the two and get good at it. Now, if you want to experiment, go for it. Just know what you're doing. The whole point of this class is know what you're doing. Do it intentionally. All right? Because most of the time you're going to be doing one of these two, and I would suggest that you stick to one of them, or you at least practice I should say, back up on that you practice both of them. I'm going to talk about kind of how to do some of these, and I'm going to focus a little bit more on the third limited, because I think this one is done poorly more often. When people do first, they don't generally make mistakes. You don't accidentally make I somebody else for a paragraph, right? That's not to say that this one's easier, because doing a good voice is hard. But what it is if you're going to do this, you lapse out of it accidentally less often. You tend to stick in your viewpoint much better. Though there is that temptation to lapse in between past and present in a first person, which you can do. You can switch back and forth between them. But I'd say it's a headache. So I would suggest not doing that too much. Does the Dresden Files ever do that? Does he ever talk about, does he ever talk in present? Or is it straight past?
Like what you're saying with the private eye, and my best friend is.
Yeah.
So Michael is a good guy.
Yeah. So he lapses into voice, even though the idea is that he's like, I think the idea is that he writes these things down after with their reflection, even though he doesn't have a frame story for him. So that's a, if you can set a time for when it's being written, like right after the adventure, Harry sits down and writes this down, and at that point the is's can be present tense if they still are and things like that, but it's really tricky. I'll just mention that to you. It can give you a headache. But Dresden Files does first person very well. So let's talk about how to not break Viewpoint in your third person limited. And let's talk about what's awesome about third person limited, because it has become the default for most of the books that you guys will be writing. I would say the majority, 70-30 of you in this class are probably going to be writing third person limited, just because I know what genres you're writing. Actually, I would honestly say that 1/3 of you are doing that, 1/3 of you are doing first, and 1/3 of you don't know. And so you're doing a bad version of this, just kind of by wandering through it. You want to use this intentionally. The reason for this is, if it's intentional, it allows you to evoke character in every sentence. And really good third person, particularly at the beginning of a scene, all right? At the beginning of the scene, you want to have cues whose viewpoint it is beyond saying it's the character. You want to have descriptions that are in viewpoint. The easy example of this I always use is, I use the Wheel of Time because, hey, I love the Wheel of Time, if you couldn't tell. In the Wheel of Time, there's a group of characters from a desert culture. They view water very differently. And so when Robert Jordan will jump into one of their viewpoints, he will often do a description that says they couldn't believe how much water this person was drinking, or that they would use it to wash their face, or something like that. That would be in viewpoint as a description. Not, he walked over to the bucket and dumped some water on his head. He walked over to the bucket and wasted a bunch of water on his face, right? That's a different description. You can see right there how that description would change your viewpoint, your perspective as a reader. And you sometimes just need he walked over and took a ladle and dumped water on his face. The majority of your descriptions are honestly going to be that, because you don't want to draw too much attention to it. But I would say every couple paragraphs, and particularly at the beginning, you want some of these descriptions to be very in viewpoint. Even if it's not, they review the water, it's like, he grabbed a ladle of water and dumped it on his head. Man, that would feel good, as I stood there holding his towel to wipe him off. But I didn't dare, right? That's going into third person, but you just put, he didn't dare. It watched the water dribble down the head and just almost wanted to lick it off. Those are different ways to describe it, right? Different characters, different descriptions. So use your descriptions. Others are jargon. Jargon's with a J, right? I always want to put a G in it. Why don't I want to put a G? Jargon. Jargon is another thing. This is very useful in science fiction or fantasy to use jargon. Don't overload us on it, particularly weird jargon. But again, if we're using the ideal example, they call people wetlanders, or they call people foreigners. You could have, the foreigner did this. Rather than calling them by the name, you call them by something that's local to their culture, and sprinkling things like that through. Again, resist the urge to come up with too many really weird ones. This is a problem with fantasy, particularly in your first chapter, that learning curve. Remember, if everything is jargon, your readers' eyes are going to cross, and they're going to be like, wow, everything is like an X and a Z. The best forms of jargon are going to feel alien but be immediately understandable, such as wetlander, right? That's a good one. And sprinkling in a few terms from the culture are okay. A few new words and things like that. But, try to use ones that are going to be immediately recognizable.
Isn't it kind of a sign of success if by the climax of the book you can have a sentence pretty much where most of the words are jargon and it's
Yes.
still understandable?
Yes, that's kind of a goal, not a goal, but it's like I don't want to say, it's like you get points. If you can sneak that in, and by the end the character says something that would be completely unintelligible before you started the book, and now it makes perfect sense to you. But you got to be really careful about how you do that. That goes back to the learning curve and description stuff that we talked about last time, right? So these things blend together, but the idea is to do stuff like this. I prefer to frequently, not that frequently, but use thoughts in italics, stolen from the first-person narrator, right? Actually going directly into first-person narrative for an italicized paragraph. Some people prefer to not do this. It's there's kind of division among writers. The opposing perspective is to just say, instead of, I wonder what he's having for dinner, just saying, what is he having for dinner? And both those arguments have something to them. One's more immediate. One is kind of a hang a lantern on, oh, by the way, we're in this viewpoint, remember? Because you will say, I wonder what he's having for dinner right now, Mary thought. It's a kind of a, hey, ding, remember, we're in viewpoint. But it's less immediate, and it's a little bit more of a tell than just saying, what was he having for dinner? Or what was he doing over there? Which you can do directly in your narrative. And you'll kind of want to intentionally decide what your style is for thoughts, okay? Which of those you want to do, or what blend of them you want to use. This is probably stuff you haven't thought about a ton. Maybe some of you have. But it's actually very useful to spend some time developing your style and deciding, how am I going to indicate what viewpoint we are in, and how am I going to cement that in the reader's mind? One of the biggest criticism against new writers' fiction is that we lose viewpoint, right? You have this great action sequence or something like that, and throughout the action sequence, we never know what's happening to the character. Like a car drives off a cliff, and in viewpoint, your first reaction should be, how does the viewpoint character react to this? His head slammed back against the chair, and everything shook, and it was chaos. That's the better way to do it. A lot of newer writers will say, the car went off the cliff, flipped 3 times, smashed into the ground. Do you see the difference between those two? One is strongly in viewpoint, pulls us into the character. The other is trying to write the book like a movie, with some camera off distantly showing what's happening. This one generally, unless you're doing this one intentionally, this one generally is where you want to be, guys, because your stories are about your characters, and if we're in the character's mind, if we're feeling what the character's feeling, it'll actually be a lot more immediate to us, and it'll feel cooler to us than tumbling off the cliff, right?
So kind of related to that, I've noticed that it's hard for me to put in thoughts.
Yeah.
Because I'm used to the movie
Right.
mentality, you're just describing the action, the dialogue, but I just forget, or I don't
Right.
think of, yeah.
You
have
don't
any tips for that?
need to use them. Just keep that in mind. Develop your style intentionally. Some people do not like thoughts because they feel too much like they feel like those are a break of viewpoint. I think in thoughts in my head. Some people don't. And it feels alien to them when I have my characters construct complete sentences. I always am talking to myself in complete sentences in my head. And it may be appropriate you to have some characters use thoughts and not other ones, because depending on how the character thinks. If you're having trouble putting it in, first see if your readers are losing viewpoint. If they are, you've got a problem. If they're not, you may be doing these other things, or these things, well enough that you're holding viewpoint. The trick is, we really do generally want to try and evoke emotion. We want to let us, without going into effusiveness, without overloading us on these things. We're in a character's viewpoint. We want to, as readers, know how they feel. If they go off the cliff and they're excited, that's a different character than the one who goes off the cliff and is terrified, like the rest of us. Or the one who thinks, not again, right? Like the whale. Those are different things.
The driving cat.
Yeah, they do very different things. And you want to be evoking emotions in your reader, and you want to be doing that by the way the characters are feeling about the actions. Again, don't give these big, long descriptions of what they're feeling, but do give us emotional cues. Having someone scream as their head gets smashed back and they're like, and you describe it in a chaotic way and evoke this sort of sense of terror, that's good. That's going to keep us in the character's head, okay? So, third person. Try it, be intentional about it, and make your focus and your goal on getting everything across through the character's eyes and lens. In fact, practice this week when you're writing. And if you're doing first person, either one. Try and do your descriptions through the character's voice. In first person, you can do it a little bit more easily. You work on, what character voice is this character sarcastic? Is this character depressed? Is this character a pessimist? The character says, and then we drove off the cliff, as I knew was going to happen. You can put it into the character's viewpoint there, and you can see right there how the first person, this one is going to be a little less immediate sometimes because of the way I just described that. But anyway, try and do this. Don't have much time to keep going on this because I want to talk a little bit about word choice, because next week we're going to have to jump to plotting, and so we have to leave some of this prose stuff behind. But yeah, hopefully this has you at least thinking about it. There are more resources online by writers talking about viewpoint intents, and I think if you can do this and you can do info dumps really well, your first page will get read. Then you have to do character and plot really well. But the reason I decided to focus on these ones up front is these are kind of the things that you should be practicing each day as you're writing. Plot is something you will have to work on. It's almost less consciously, right? You'll get an instinct for it, but your prose, you can be like, all right, let's make this this passage more in viewpoint. Let's try and say, what would this character do? And you can do these sort of things. They'll be hallmarks of a professional writer. The thing you want to be working on with your prose, in conjunction with this, is you generally want to be more concrete, and you want to be more immediate, and you want to be more precise. All right? This one means fewer words. This one means the right words. All right? This one means using words that evoke a sense and words that that have a concrete impact. I can't use concrete in the description of concrete, though.
Tangible.
Tangible. There you go. Excellent. It's tangible. This one means active rather than passive. Okay? This one means that you are cutting out the fluff. So, these are generally considered by most writers to be the hallmarks of strong prose, particularly in the type of prose we're doing. Now, there is something else over here nebulous, which is beauty. Aesthetics, yeah. This is the sort of thing that taking a class from one of the poets on campus can talk to you about better than I can. We do want to have beautiful language. We do want to have good prose. I subscribe to more of an Orwellian theory for my own writing. George Orwell said that he wanted his writing to be like a window pane through which you saw the story and the ideas. The prose, if it was too cluttered, would be like a dirty window pane. And if the prose was too flowery and beautiful, he felt that you would end up looking at it instead of the story. And some books are about the flowery prose. There are some stories where the prose is like a stained glass window. And you can see stuff on the other side, but it doesn't matter as much as the stained glass window itself. I feel that there are a lot of writers that are doing that, and that's perfectly reasonable, and it's all right. Even in science fiction fantasy, there's some writers that do this, and they do a good job. I have heard Dave Farland talk about the idea of uber prose, which is a combination of these two concepts, that when you stop and look at it, you realize that it's beautiful, but if you're not, you're just getting the story. He usually uses Tolkien as an example of someone who is capable of doing this. And I would say that that does work. I find that Pat Rothfuss, one of his good things is he's really good at this, but I don't find myself distracted by it very often. And some people have a natural talent for this. Other people, like Pat, just spend hours and hours and hours on a single sentence trying to get it right. You'll have to decide where you want to be on this. But even in this type of prose, generally, these are the things that are kind of pushing you toward this. All right? You had a question.
So I was thinking with Rothfuss and his character, a lot of what is written, I think, is forgiven or just read through because it's the character.
It is the character. He gets away with having a poet, basically, as a main character who wants to describe things like this.
And he hates poets.
But he hates poets, but, he is a poet. That's the irony of it, yeah.
So how does that work with all this? What kind of lines do you draw with your character and what they would say?
Do what the story demands. Pat is really good at this. He's probably one of the best ones writing. China's very good at it too. There are some other people who are very good at this. If you're capable of doing this, go for it. If it's not, I don't try for this very often. I want my stories to be window panes. I will try a paragraph here and there to do something more beautiful. I like to have cool metaphors, some of these things that work really well. But my focus is almost always on the character and making things clear. And it's one of the big differences between my writing and Pat's writing. So, depends on what you guys want to do. So, concrete language. Try and make things more concrete. And what I wish I could do is pull out one of your writings and put it up on the screen and go through it with the class and show you what I mean by this. But I don't think I want to do that and embarrass any of you too much. But that's the way to learn it. You want me to do it to you?
Yeah, do that.
All right. Let's pull. Let's do it. I don't know how much time we have. We really need to be ending here. Do we want to do this for like a few minutes and see if I can do it? Yeah. Okay. Let's try and do this. All right. Let's see if I can do anything to this, as if I were writing it, to try and focus on these three things with prose. Or Othis decided not to change his robes before entering the Crusaders' Cathedral. He was the leader of a group of refugees from an insane domain. He thought if he looked the part, it might help sway the Crusaders' cause. That's actually kind of telly, but it's okay. We start off in someone's viewpoint, right? We know whose viewpoint we are. Well done for mentioning it in the first sentence. Let's see. As he strode toward the Crusader's throne, he silently noted he was having his intended effect. Okay, this one is yeah, that's okay too. Back to Wayne's surprise. Okay, so he's wearing blood-stained robes. I was ran the door and watched with mouths agape as the outer courtyard filled with immigrants. The line of refugees still stretched all the way to the border. All right, so let's say we wanted to knock up the concrete level of this a bit. Now, one thing you're going to have to keep in mind is when you make things more concrete, you're generally adding words, okay? Any place you can make something one more of these things without adding a word, you generally want to do it. So let's look right here. For instance, here's an example of what I was talking about before. Orthus knew we needed to strike the perfect balance between confident and desperate. Now, a lot of people would say, cut that. The reason being that this was what I was just talking about a little bit ago. You'll have to decide, do you want to be using those tags for when someone's thinking something or observing something? Harriet, the editor on the Wheel of Time, always cut when I did that. because we're in the character's viewpoint. You've already established it in the first paragraph, the first paragraph. So we don't need the oath is new. Awed and overwhelmed, had no part in his planned demeanor. So despite the amazing opulence of surroundings, he kept his eyes fixed forward. If you were trying to make this more immediate, this is kind of a very, this is an abstract sentence. What does this even mean? Awed and overwhelmed, had no part of his plan. I'm having trouble figuring out what that even means. And it's drawing us away from what's happening, right? And so what I would say here is you want to go right into the cathedral, right here, and I would cut that one. Because, yes, that's in Viewpoint, but it's this weird abstraction. We want to keep in head. Now, what we want to do right here, let's look at this one. How can we make this more in his viewpoint? Do you have any suggestions? Look at this sentence right here. This is a sentence that it's a nice description. Cathedral's immense, wide enough the edges of the walls were only visible through the fog, and long enough you could only see about halfway down it.
Have him mentally compared to his former Indalmus Cathedral. He's
Yeah.
a high priest somewhere else. He can compare and contrast.
There you go. That would be a wonderful way. What else could we do? What could we do to put this more in Viewpoint? Could he be more could he be dismissive, or could he be like, "Wow, this one's so much better than mine"? Or does this make sense? What do you got?
or he could have his eyes catch a particular thing that seems to draw his attention,
Right.
and concentrate on describing that in his.
That's where we're going with the concrete thing. Like the cathedral was immense, is okay. This one is much better. You could only see the, it was long enough you could only see about halfway down it. See, that's a concrete sensory experience. The cathedral was immense, means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. Let me talk about something here with this concrete. With the concrete, we do something. Sorry if I can't see this. I just drew a triangle. We do something called the pyramid of abstraction, which the idea of the pyramid of abstraction is you use a lot of concrete language to earn your abstract language. Abstract language is language that everyone who reads the book is going to think of something different. So, for instance, a dog. Is a dog concrete or abstract? Abstract. A dog is very abstract. You've listened to my lectures. I explained it. A dog is way up here because a dog, everyone thinks of a different dog. An immense cathedral is very different. It's probably right about here.
So build the foundation first.
So if you want to pull it down, if you want to, you need to make these decisions. I'm not telling you. I'm saying if you want to pull it down, instead of describing the cathedral as an immense cathedral, you say, he strode past stained glass windows, depicting this thing from the world. His old Adama that he loved so much. Oh man, it was so hard to see this. There was in all these array of colors that shined across him as he strode through. That's an image, right? That shows us grand cathedral. If you want to say, if you want to highlight something more concrete, yes, you can only see halfway down. You can say torches lined it and got smaller and smaller until the distant ones were just pinpricks. That's even a little more concrete than what you did. But you can see each one I'm doing is adding more words. Almost always pulling down on the pyramid of abstraction adds more words. So you try to compensate that by cutting out vagaries like this that don't really tell you anything, so that you can then get rid of vague terms and you can use those words right here to make the cathedral was immense into something of a powerful image that we are imagining, and we're there with the character, and it has something about his emotions tied to it, so that as we're going along, yeah. And I see you're actually doing this a little bit more down here. But again, this one is less vague than this one, if you see that. And so you may want to say, you may want to, try and cut down. Stained glass windows lend so much light as bright as day. He passed the stained glass window and the light shone in his eyes, almost blinding him, or the sun, something like that, that's more in him, rather than this, which is kind of just a tell. Now, the thing about this is, once again, guys, sometimes you just want to use this. I can't tell you when to use them and when not to. I can tell you what to do if you want your language to be more concrete and more in character. But sometimes, if you do this, you will end up with these enormous paragraphs and these enormous pages that you don't want to have because you want to move on to the action. So your job as writers is to decide when you're going to be doing things like this and when you're going to be transitioning into more character-driven moments and when you're going to go into the action, okay? I don't know how much time we have to do more, but this is the idea. I would like to do this with more of your writing in the future if some of you are brave enough, as Brennan was, to do this. So let's just go here. Is there a word for half ran, half walked?
Jogged?
That's what we mean by being more precise. And by the way, most of these things are not things I do in first draft. This is all stuff I do in second draft.
Well, I asked you about
Yeah.
that earlier. So.
Yeah, so don't worry about it. What I'm doing here is if I were looking back at this. So this is what we mean by being more precise. If you can use a word that is a specific word that means 4 words that you put in it, you want to try and use it. Jogged is probably, or trotted. You may want the half run, half walked, but see here what we're talking about. A lot of times the better writing is going to be the single word that does everything that you want. So let's see, continuing. Is there a continuing to walk forward that we could do?
Proceeding.
Yes, proceeding past the man, or striding past the man. If you striding past the man there.
He did the last paragraph.
Oh, you do striding already, so yeah, proceeding. Yeah, proceeding. See, there you go, you've got a precise word that has taken the place of 4 words. So what you're doing here is you're trying to make this more precise and concrete. So the places where you really want to pull out a description and just clobber us in the face with this awesome 2 or 3 sentence, not 2 or 3 paragraph, but 2 or 3 sentence paragraph of something just evocative of emotion and power, you have the space for it. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Earlier on, when I was talking to you, you said it was a good exercise to cut out about 1/3 of the words from your initial draft. Is this the way that you're doing it?
This is the way I'm doing it. It's exactly how I'm doing it.
Wonderful.
And I cut 15%. A third is a bit much for most people. I cut 15%, and I will often do as an exercise, I'll go like this. Say, okay, that is 463 words. Let's cut 60 of them. And I will just go through and I will work that page until I've cut out 60 words. And one of the things I'll be looking for are places where I repeat myself. And we do this a lot. You did it a little bit up here with this one. Just a little bit here where you describe the light and then you describe the light better. Does that make sense?
Yes.
We do that a lot. We do like the topic sentence, which is a good idea, but then slightly more descriptive topic sentence and then really good description.
So this is curiosity. Way of Kings was 15% shorter than what it was.
Yes, it was. I kept 15% from basically everything. So, yeah. Okay, here's a quick one for you guys. Be wary of said bookisms. Because I just talked about using the more precise word, a lot of people jump to the assumption that using said bookisms, which maintained is a more precise word than said. This is kind of usually considered an exception to the rule, where in the dialogue you don't want the attention to be on the tag, you want it to be on the dialogue itself. And so because of that, you want to try and evoke these things in the dialogue and just use said, and stay away from using the more precise terms there, and try and get it across here. The reason for that being is that most people will skip these, and so they'll lose it if you put it here.
Okay.
And if you put the said bookism there and put one that's really kind of weird, it'll draw their eyes and they'll focus on that instead of what was actually said. And so that's a weird inconsistency with this right here. When people may have told you before, just use said, the reason for it is that we want your focus to be on that. And I think that he just maintains it already by what he says. Another big point of advice is to try and move the tags as close to the front as possible. This is a clarity issue. We want to know who's speaking as soon as possible. Tags are invisible, but we'll snap who said it. And so putting something at the end of a sentence is much worse than working it in at the very first place that it's reasonable to put it in. So these are just little prose things that we can do that we can try and push the language to be more precise, to use the right words. I don't see a lot of passive voice in here, so the third one is not a problem for you. We'll have to find somebody else who's using the passive voice that we can just destroy it. But yeah, all right. I could probably spend more time on this. This is actually pretty good. Your prose is solid. It reads like a first draft that I would do. So yeah, this isn't terrible. But you know what? This is what I do for everything. Is I would go through and I'd be like, do I need this sentence? Do I need this sentence? What's a word that would replace this? So there you go.
Thank you.
We'll try to do some more of that in future weeks. I wish I had a little more time for it, but I do want to get to writing groups. And I'm sorry, I was late, but I did get a drive up to the little stall that they let you past if you're a teacher, in my car service with the tinted windows, that pulls up and puts the window down and says, "Mr. Sanderson would like to proceed." That was pretty cool. They probably thought I was a general authority for a minute.